Let's make this smoke animation in TouchDesigner right now. It only takes about 10 different operators to make this, so it's pretty easy. And the original reason that I actually made this tutorial is because I wanted to use the Nvidia Flow Emitter operator in the comps category, but I don't have an Nvidia GPU, so I can't use this operator. So basically, if you're like me and you have a MacBook or some PC that does not have an Nvidia GPU, then this tutorial is for you if you want to make smoke, so that you can basically mimic some functionality of the Nvidia Flow Emitter using standard TouchDesigner operators. Okay. Starting with a fresh TouchDesigner canvas, let's just take a look in the palette. And in the lower half of the palette, let's just scroll down in that. And we're just going to drag and drop particlesGPU from the lower half of the palette into the TouchDesigner canvas area. So drag and drop particlesGPU. And now let's close the palette. Now let's add a sphere to the left of the particlesGPU. Let's press Tab on the keyboard. Go to the SOP category, click on Sphere, and drop that to the left of the particlesGPU. Now let's connect the sphere to particlesGPU, just like this. Now let's adjust the radius parameter of the sphere operator. Click on the word radius, drag to the left until the radius of X, Y, and Z are 0.1. And now the particles coming from particlesGPU are being emitted only from that small sphere shape. So in our particlesGPU, the particles are being blown downward. Let's change it so that they're being blown upward. Since we're making smoke, the smoke is going to rise. In the wind parameter, we're going to change the Y value. And let's change the Y value of the wind parameter to 300. And now you can see the particles are being blown upward. So our particles are being blown upward, but they're pretty fast. We're going to slow that down so that that's more like the speed at which smoke would be rising. So in the parameters for particlesGPU, we are going to change the drag parameter, and we're going to change that to about 0.4. So after you change the drag to about 0.4, you can see that the particles are now being blown upward at a much slower rate. And also in the particlesGPU operator under the Particles tab, we're going to change the mass to about 0.17. So now our particles are being blown upward slowly, but they're not really going left to right much. Let's add something in so that the particles kind of sway left to right. So let's add a noise operator. Just press Tab on the keyboard. And in the top category, click on Noise and drop noise somewhere near the sphere. Now in the parameters for the noise, just turn off monochrome. Now in the parameters of the noise operator, just go to the Transform tab. And in the Translate parameter for the X value, just type in this expression. The expression is abstime.frame divided by 100. That will get the noise to move to the right. Now connect the noise to the particlesGPU operator, just like this. And now you should see at least a little bit of movement in the direction of the particles. Instead of just being straight up, now it kind of goes left to right. Now let's get this particlesGPU operator to start looking like smoke. So in the Render tab of the parameters for the particlesGPU operator, change the texture drop-down menu from leaf to circle. Now we're going to add a blur operator to the right of particlesGPU. So just press Tab on the keyboard. And in the top category, just click on Blur and place Blur somewhere to the right of particlesGPU. Connect particlesGPU to Blur. In the parameters for the blur operator, let's change the pre-shrink to 8. You can see the effect that that has. Now let's change the filter size to 9, and let's change the sample step to 2 in the X and Y values. So click on sample step, change that to 2, and you can see that blurred our image quite a bit. Now we are going to use the feedback edge operator from the palette to make this more interesting. So if you don't have the palette open, just click this button to open the palette. And in the palette, just click on the image filters category and find feedback edge. Now let's drag and drop feedback edge just to the right of the blur operator, just like this, and connect blur to feedback edge, just like this. And you can see the effect that feedback edge had on our blur operator. And now in the parameters for the feedback edge operator, let's change the source tint color parameter to this light orange color here. And now let's change the edge color to a mid-tone gray, kind of like this right here. But you can see that that effect is too exaggerated, so we're going to change the edge strength. We're going to reduce that to about 0.07. And now you can see that with a lower edge strength, we're getting more of a realistic smoke type effect. Also in the parameters for the feedback edge operator, we're going to change the source gain to about 0.7, just like that. We're going to change the blur feedback to about 1. And we're going to change the feedback black level to about 0.04. We're going to change the hue shift to about -2.8. And change the saturation multiplier to about 1.1. Now from the feedback edge operator, we're going to add an operator onto this to make it black and white. So press tab on the keyboard, and in the top category, just click on monochrome and place monochrome somewhere to the right of the feedback edge operator, and then connect monochrome to feedback edge, just like this. Now if we click the display button on the mono operator, you can see our project appear in the background of TouchDesigner. Let's add an operator onto the end of mono. In the top category, just click on transform and drop transform to the right of mono. For the fourth value in the background color parameter, just type in the number 1 and then turn on the toggle switch that says comp over background color. And now let's turn off the display switch on the mono operator and turn on the display switch for the transform operator. Now you can see our smoke effect in the background of TouchDesigner. And a lot of the smoke is not visible because our source geometry is in the middle of the canvas. Let's go ahead and move that source geometry down toward the bottom so that we can view more of the smoke. And since our source geometry is the sphere operator we originally placed down, let's select the sphere operator. And in the sphere operator parameters, we're just going to change the center parameter. And we are going to adjust the Y value of the center parameter. And we're just going to dial that down until our animation reaches more of the bottom of the canvas area here. So maybe -0.9. And now we can view more of the smoke. Now let's change some parameters in the particlesGPU operator. So let's go to the forces tab of the particlesGPU operator. Let's change the external force parameter X value to 1. We're going to change Y to 0, and we're going to change Z to 0. And then change the external magnitude to about 1.3. Let's change the wind magnitude to about 1.9. Let's change the turbulence parameter, Y value, to about 0.8. Let's change the turb period to about 0.045. Let's change the turb seed to 2. Let's change the turbulence magnitude to about 1.9. And let's change the input magnitude to about 0.048. After changing those values, we can see that the particles are kind of looking more like a smoke type pattern. Okay, so we just changed some things in the forces tab of the particlesGPU operator. Now we're going to change some things in the particles tab of the particlesGPU operator. So just click on the particles tab of the particlesGPU operator. Let's change the number of particles to 50,000. Let's change the life to about 10.9. Change the life variance to about 2.2. Let's make sure the particle size minimum is at about 0.04. Let's set the particle size max to about 0.2. For the drag, I actually ended up at about 0.44. And after you change all of those parameters, your particlesGPU operator should be looking something similar to what is on my screen right now. All right, now let's change some parameters in the noise operator. So in the noise operator, we're going to change the period to about 1.7. We're going to change the harmonics to 1. Let's change the harmonic spread to about 1.6. Change the harmonic gain to about 1.1. Change the exponent to about 1.1. And now your noise operator should look something like this. All right, now that our particlesGPU is looking pretty good, what we're going to do now is actually slim this down a bit. I'm going to remove the mono and the transform that we made earlier so that we can just build off of this feedback edge operator here. Okay, I'm removing the mono and transform operators. Now let's do a quick recap of what's happening. First, we are creating a geometry. That geometry is being fed into the particlesGPU operator. We're also creating some noise, and that is also being fed into the particles GPU operator. And then particles GPU is going out to blur, and blur is going to feedback edge. The sphere operator is creating the geometry that's acting as the base for our particles GPU. So our particles are being emitted from the sphere. And then the noise operator is also affecting the particles that are coming off of the sphere. And then we are blurring those particles to make it like a more smoke-like effect. And then we're using feedback edge to just take the edges of the blur and create feedback from those edges. At this point, we're going to work off of the feedback edge operator. Right-click on the output of feedback edge, click on edge, place edge to the right of feedback edge. Now we're going to add a blur, so right-click on the output of edge, click on blur, place that to the right of edge. Now we're going to add another edge after blur. So right-click on the output of blur and click on edge, and place that edge somewhere to the right of blur. So now after the feedback edge operator, we have edge, blur, and edge. Click on the first edge operator we placed, and in the parameters of that edge operator, change the strength to 10, and change the sample step to around 20 or 21. And now change the edge color to a bright orange color. Turn on the comp over input switch. Now that first edge operator should be orange. Now we're going to change the blur operator parameters. So click on blur, change pre-shrink to 8, and change the filter size to 2. Now go to the last edge operator, change the black level to 1, change the strength to 60, and bump up the sample step to about 40 or 41. And last but not least, hit that box that says comp over input. And for the last edge operator, change that edge color to red. Now let's right-click on the output of the last edge operator so that we can add a transform operator. So in the top category, click on transform, place that to the right of the last edge operator. Change the last box of the background color parameter to 1, and turn on comp over background color. Now right-click on the output of the transform operator, and click on monochrome, and then just drop the monochrome operator somewhere to the right of your last transform operator. Your smoke should be looking pretty smoky. It should look somewhat like this if you followed all the directions. At this point, you could press the display switch to view this in the background of TouchDesigner. And there you have it. That's a pretty smoky animation. If there are a couple things that you could change out, I would change some of the parameters on the particles GPU operator. In particular, the particles tab and the forces tab. If you change things like the turb period and the turbulence magnitude, and any of the magnitudes in here will generally change the strength at which the smoke is being blown. You can also change the sphere to any other shape. For example, you could put a grid in here or replace it with a rectangle. There's even a way to use the webcam as a video device and then have something trace over the webcam. It's a trace operator. So if you want to basically mess with this on the webcam, you can do that and replace the sphere with that. You can also change the edge color in any of the edge operators, including feedback edge. So for example, if you change the edge color of feedback edge and edge 1 and edge 2, you can make that look a lot more green or blue colored, kind of mystical looking or magical. Or we could turn off the display switch for mono, turn on the display switch for transform 1, and then we could mess with the edge colors to try and get this to look like fire. One thing that I think you should check out is the particles GPU operator parameters, specifically the ones that say magnitude and variance. For example, if you change the wind variance to 1, it seems to make the wind more variable. Or if you change the input magnitude to something like 0.08, then it makes the smoke look quite a bit more realistic. Okay, that's about it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you have any requests for a tutorial that you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below.